Ken Hammond is a professor at New York State University, specializing in China and East Asia. He spent 10 years living and studying in China, is fluent in Mandarin, holds a BA in History and Political Science from Kent State University, and a PhD in History and East Asian Languages from Harvard University. He's the author of several books and courses, and his latest book is China's Revolution and the Quest for a Socialist Future, published by 1804 Books. Ken, welcome.
Hey, glad to be here. I very appreciate the opportunity to be here with the Veterans for Peace convention, and I've been doing some work with some of y'all out at Hammond Air Force Base here in New Mexico, and so it's good to see some of y'all, put some names and faces together and all that. And I'm very glad to be here as part of the program today. I want to really shout out to Matt for his presentation. I think this idea of the dying mule kicking hardest is I love the metaphor, because I think that what we're seeing is indeed an imperial system that has seen its day, and the world is going through a very profound period of geopolitical reconfiguration, economic reconfiguration. The world going forward is going to be, assuming that we don't all blow ourselves up, is going to be a very different world than the one that most of us have grown up with and been used to most of our lives. And obviously, one of the key factors in that process is China. China today is, some debate as to whether it's the second largest or the largest economy in the world. It's one of the two most populous countries in the world, just having been overtaken by India very recently, but still a tremendously large population in China, over 1.4 billion people. And, this is a very important component of whatever goes on our planet. Historically, that has always been true, and it is certainly true today. But what's going on, these changes that are taking place in the world, do involve dramatic reconfigurations. And the United States, which has been at the heart of a global system of capitalism, of imperialism, whatever you want to call it, especially since the end of the Second World War, and even more so since the end of the Cold War back at the early 90s. The United States has been used for a long time to basically running the affairs of the planet, telling other countries what to do and when to do it, and punishing them if they fail to comply with American requests, shall we say, with align themselves with America's self-defined interests. And I think that a lot of what Matt talked about in terms of the ways in which the United States projects its power and its willingness to engage in all kinds of very reckless activity certainly is something that we've seen historically, and we continue to see going on in the world around us today. So what I would like to do just briefly today is talk a little bit about China's place in the world, not so much in terms of its domestic developments. That's a very complex and long-term process that's been going on over these last 75 years. But in terms of China's relationship, especially with the global South, with the developing countries, the what used to be called and sometimes still is the third world countries that are that many of them were former colonies of European nations or of the United States in the case of places like the Philippines, and others, countries that perhaps were never colonized completely, but nonetheless have struggled to advance themselves in a world dominated by, for a long time, dominated by Western Europe and North America. This change that's taking place involves the emergence, in a sense, the reemergence of a multi-centric world, a world in which there is no single one superpower or even a cluster of powers like the United States and its sort of vassal allies in Western Europe. But instead a world in which there will be many centers of power, many centers, more importantly, of productivity, of innovation, of creativity in economic life, in social life, cultural life, things like that. But that threatens the hegemony, the dominance of the United States. And it is that which has put the United States into such a sort of reckless mode, presented as defending some kind of, as they like to say, rules-based international order. They make the rules and they give the orders. But instead, we're going to see a world that is in which many countries may choose their own paths and may go about their own business. And China's place in that has been an important one since the beginning of the People's Republic in 1949. In the 1950s, China played an important role in the emergence of what was called at that time the non-aligned movement. Countries like India or Egypt or Indonesia that were coming out of their particular colonial experiences, and trying to chart a path in a world which was at that time quite starkly divided between the United States and its allies, the capitalist world, or as they like to call themselves, the free world, and the socialist bloc, led by at that point the Soviet Union, but with the countries of Eastern Europe as well. And of course, most recently added to that would have been China and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and the liberation struggles in Southeast Asia were ongoing. So China got involved very early, was a participant in the 1955 Bandung Conference of the Non-Aligned Movement. Also took part in a lot of, even though it was struggling to begin to develop its own domestic economy, from the late 50s, early 60s, began to be involved in providing aid and assistance to development in other countries, particularly in Africa. They were very deeply involved in the building of a railway in Tanzania and Zambia that opened up parts of East and South Africa to economic development. They also articulated what became and remain fundamental principles for China's foreign policy, for China's international relations, what are called the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. And these are all based on the concept of mutuality, that is to say, mutual respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of countries, mutual non-aggression, let's not fight with each other, mutual benefit, that relations between countries shouldn't be just in one direction where one country benefits and the other is exploited, mutual non-interference in the internal affairs of each other, and peaceful coexistence, which is an overall kind of paradigm of sort of mutually getting along with one another, recognizing that there were differences between countries, differences between peoples and cultures, differences between political and economic systems, but not prioritizing those, not making those the grounds for conflict, but rather seeking paths where people could hopefully work together and find ways to pursue their shared interests to the extent that they perceive those. Now as I say, I don't want to get into the domestic developments in China. China struggled for a long time to try to figure out its own path in terms of economic development, how to organize its political and economic affairs. Eventually, by the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, that put China on the path on which it remains today of reform and opening to the outside world, as they say. And this brought China into a period of 20 or so years, perhaps even a bit longer than that, in which, in order to gain access to investment, to technologies, to knowledge and information, to the experience of development and economic growth of the capitalist world, China took a kind of low profile in terms of its socialist agenda, and adopted a position that was accommodating to the global capitalist system. Many people perceive that as the end of the revolution, as China taking the capitalist road. And of course, there can be debates about the nature of the Chinese economy even today. But as those years went by, and as China began to achieve a greater degree of prosperity, as the development of the economy, the growth of the economy, which, as we know, for almost 20 years went on at 10%, 11%, 12% a year, they were able to socially accumulate resources, assets, wealth, which at a certain point could then be deployed to address both domestic challenges of inequality and environmental stress and things like that, but could also begin to be deployed in terms of trying to help other countries, trying to assist other countries in the process of developing new institutions, new infrastructure, new ways in which they could pursue their own interests, they could pursue their own course of development without having to be subordinate to American domination, without having to go hat in hand to the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund, or directly to the United States or Western European financial institutions, and in which the power that the United States has held to manipulate global relationships through things like economic sanctions would be curtailed, would be reduced, right? For a long time, ever since the Bretton Woods conferences back in 44, 45, the United States has controlled the settlement of international payments. The International Bank or the Bank of International Settlements, is headquartered in Switzerland, but a lot of its operations go through New York City. And that's been the mechanism that has allowed the United States to impose economic sanctions, because it can control the settlement of international transactions in dollars in ways that allows it to punish other countries and to reduce their ability to operate their economies and develop their societies. If we could build, or if institutions could be built outside of that American domination, that would be a good thing for all these countries around the world. So about 10, 12 years ago, as the United States was adopting what they called the pivot to Asia, Mike alluded to that, talking about the redeployment of American military assets, trying to encircle China, trying to contain China. China responded to that by launching a number of initiatives that have been designed and have been working to do exactly to undertake exactly that work of getting people out from under the dominance of American institutions or American dominated institutions. And so I want to just take a few minutes and wrap up by talking about that. Of course, most of us have heard of the Belt and Road Initiative. This is a huge infrastructure project, many projects, but a single initiative designed to create physical infrastructure, pipelines, ports, transportation facilities of different kinds, a railway system that runs all across the Eurasian continent, so you can ship things from Shanghai to Rotterdam, in much less time and at lower expense than even by maritime transport. Other kinds of infrastructure that have been built all over Africa, parts of Asia, Latin America, even in a few countries in Europe, like Serbia and Italy. They've all been part of this Belt and Road Initiative. There's something called the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is helping through loans and other kinds of financial assistance, helping countries to develop their domestic infrastructure in various ways. BRICS has been mentioned already. Initially Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Now it's recently been expanded to include a few more countries. There are a couple of dozen countries that are queuing up. They want to be part of BRICS, because BRICS it's not a military alliance. It's not even a political alliance in the sense of treaties and sort of legal obligations, but it's a coordinated action, a coordinated activity of different countries to try to pursue these goals of independent development. And if we look at the BRICS countries, we can see that, for example, in terms of the crisis in Ukraine, that they've been very reluctant to go along with the American line. If you look at the list of countries that have either voted against or abstained from voting on the American resolutions at the UN about Ukraine, you see that it aligns pretty closely with both the membership of BRICS and the countries that are hoping to become part of that. De-dollarization is another initiative that China's been a part of, although not the sole advocate of this. The idea of finding ways to settle international transactions, not using the US dollar, but using either a basket of currencies or using particular currencies. India and Russia, of course, have been doing a lot of this, settling their mutual economic transactions with rubles and rupees. The renminbi, the Chinese currency, has been used in a lot of instances, but other currencies as well have been part of this as countries try to get out from under that system of American domination. And finally, China has announced what they call the three global initiatives, which are efforts to work with other countries. One is the Global Development Initiative, another the Global Security Initiative, and the third is the Global Civilization Initiative. And each of these has to do with sort of articulating a vision of a multi-centric world, a greener world, a world in which development is going to move away from fossil fuel-based energy production and things like that, to alternative energy, electric vehicles, things like that. And China itself has had to reconfigure, has had to reorient its own development as they've taken the global crisis of the environment and the climate much more seriously in recent years. So we can see these different kinds of initiatives being proposed by China, being pursued by China. And all of this is part of, as I say, this effort to create new institutions, new infrastructure, new ways in which countries, they don't have to line themselves up with China. China doesn't impose political conditions on its aid or assistance, which again is something that's attractive to countries that are tired of being told by the United States and the World Bank and the IMF exactly how they have to run their countries and cut back their social services and things like that. China just doesn't do that. And of course, it gets criticized by the Western media. But, a lot of countries are very happy to work with a partner that doesn't impose those kinds of demands on them. So this is moving towards this idea, as I say, of a multi-centric world in which countries can pursue their own development. Hopefully, along the way, they will align themselves or accommodate themselves to more just and more equitable patterns. China models that in its own economic activities at home, but they're not seeking to go out and reorganize the world as a new Sinocentric order, moving away from a Western Eurocentric or American-centric order. They're very, very happy to see a world in which countries go about their business in their own ways and on their own terms. So for us, trying to understand this here in the United States, as people who are committed to peace, to justice, to a more equitable and sustainable future for our planet, to not blowing ourselves up in some kind of desperate effort to hang on to the power and the perks that have been enjoyed by a small elite at the top of our society for a long time, we've got to convince them by whatever means we can that they gotta wake up and smell the coffee. That the world is changing around us, and what we need to do is figure out how to make the best of those changes, how to take advantage of the opportunities that are being presented to us, rather than desperately clinging to a dying empire, rather than being the dying mule that's going to kick the way Matt talked about, and instead try to be a force for positive change and a force for a better future. Our work is to avoid war and seek a peace, but a peace that is also one of a better future, better prosperity, shared prosperity, mutual benefit for us all. So thank you.